Okay, so now if you want to automate the same process of creating an image, then we will be using a file called Docker file, in which we will have to give the instructions what is that we are trying to do manually. That will be taken care by the Docker, where by reading the instructions of the Docker file, it will be creating the image automatically from it. Okay, so whatever that we have done manually, the same thing is what we have to give as instructions to the Docker file, where when you try to run this Docker file, Docker will read the instructions, and one by one or line by line, it will be trying to create a container, and inside that, line by line, whatever the steps you have given, that it will execute, and from that it is going to create a container. So just like how did we create a image? First we created a container, and inside that we had put some base image, and then on top of that we tried to put specific files or application that we want. Then we came out of the container, and from that we created a image by running the docker commit and docker tag command. The same thing, when you're going to use a Docker file, you have to give the instructions on what is the image that you have to create your container first, and inside that what and all steps that you want to do, that you will be giving it line by line. And then after everything is finished, immediately the Docker will create a image out of that container which has been created by the Docker itself directly in the background. Okay, so everything will be run in the background automatically. So for that we will be giving all the instructions. So to give the instructions, by default we will be using a file name called as Docker file. So this is the name of the file which the Docker will understand to automate the process of creating a image. So first what we can do is, let's create a separate folder. Okay, now here, now under this, what we are going to do is, we had this couple of files, right? Now under this, let me create a new file called as Docker file. Okay, now any instructions that you want to pass, we will be passing through this file. Now the instructions what you are going to give will be having certain specific syntax, so that is what we need to understand. Okay, and now the very first instruction that you will be giving to the Docker file is, what is the image of the container which the Docker has to automatically create, wherein it will execute all the steps that we are going to give inside this Docker file, and then from that it will be creating a new image. So for that we will be using a instruction or a keyword called as from. So the very first line of your Docker file should contain a keyword called as from, which specifies that the container which the Docker is going to use for creating the image. So what is that image you want to put inside that container? So that is what we are going to specify using the from and the name of the image. Okay, so remember, the very first line should be a keyword called from, and what is the image that you want to use to create the first container out of which we will be creating our own image. Okay, so that is the first instruction that you're going to give. So again, it should be in the caps followed by the name of the image, whatever that you already have in your Docker engine. If not, this image will be first downloaded, and then based on that it will be creating a new container. In that container, whatever steps that you're going to give following this will be executed in it, and from that we will be creating a new image. Okay, so the first instruction called from will specify what is the image that you want to use to create your container. Now after this, any kind of command that you want the Docker file to execute inside the container, you will give it using a command called run. So run is nothing but after you have created the container out of this image, inside that container, what is that steps that you want to do automatically? So for every command or step that you want to run, you will be using a keyword called as run, followed by what is that specific command or what is that you want to do inside the newly created container. Okay, so remember the next instruction that we are going to give is using a keyword called run followed by any command that you give. So what it will do, it will take this command and run inside the newly created container based on this Ubuntu image. Okay, that is what it is going to do. So here we'll say in the capital run, and what is that you want to do. So let's say if I'm using Ubuntu based image, then I will have to use a command called as apt-get to install the VIM. Okay, so here let's say apt-get, and first you can say update and then run apt-get install VIM. Now what will happen here is first, okay, let me put it up as a diagram. So first thing what we are going to do is we are going to have a file, a Docker file. Okay, so this will be our Docker file in which we will be giving all the instructions that we want the Docker to run automatically. Okay, so we'll be having all the instructions here. And from this, the first keyword, if you say from, that is the keyword using which it will be creating a container. Okay, so now what it will do is it will create a container, and while creating the container, whatever the image that you have specified here, it will try to take that, and based on that it will create the first container. Okay, and after creating it, next any step that you want to run inside it, you will be giving it using run. So now here we had given a Ubuntu based image. So first thing inside our container, we will be having the Ubuntu image, and top of that, whatever command that you have given, it will be running. So in my case, I have given a package to install VIM. So VIM will be installed on top of this. And from this, now if I create a new image, what will happen? That image will basically contain what? It will contain both the things. That is, first, it will contain the default Ubuntu specific files, and then it will also contain your VIM package in it. So that is how, using the Docker file, whatever that we have to do, the Docker will create a container in the background, and every step that you give here, one by one, it will be trying to execute in it. And after completing, from this, it will create a new image where it will be exactly the same as what you have put inside the container. And once this is used, the container will be deleted because we are not going to use it. So all this activity will be done in the background. Okay, so this is what we are going to do using Dockerfile, wherein as of now, I have given two commands to run inside the Docker container, which is going to help us to create an image out of it. Okay, so once you have written, now how is that you're going to call this Docker file? So to call the Docker file, we will use the command called docker build, where for the Docker file, we need to give an image what it has to create out of it. So that we will be specifying using -t. -t represents the tag name. So what we are saying is do a Docker build of this image name that you have to create, and what is the Docker file that it has to take. So if you say dot in the current directory, it will search for a default file name with the name Docker file. If it is available, it will be taking it and it will be doing a build based on that. So when you execute this command on the current directory, if you have a Docker file, it will read it, and based on this instruction, it will try to create a new container and run all the steps one by one. And then finally, from that, it will create this image. The name will be exactly this one. Okay, so now let's try to run that. So On our current directory, we have the Docker file. So here, if I say docker build hyphen t, and let's say this is our my image June 01. Okay, let me say this is the first image that I've created, and spaced followed by a dot which represent pick up the Docker file in my current directory by default. So you can see what it is doing. Basically, first it is going to create a container. In that container based on Ubuntu, and in that it is trying to run the steps whatever we have given one by one. So first it is doing a update, and after the update, pretty much you can see it is trying to run the command called install. So first it is executing this update, and after that if you scroll down, you can see it is trying to run the next command called as apt-get install vim. Okay, now actually it stopped now because while you're entering, while you're running this apt-get install, it is asking for a yes or no option which we didn't give it. Okay, so that is when what we will do now is we'll try to open the Docker file, and in here we'll be giving a option that is -y. So that will represent that we need to run it in a S mode. So by default, it will be taking it as a S. Okay. So now you can see it is trying to install the package automatically. And once this is done, the next thing it will do is it will create a new image with the name called my image June 01. Okay. So it is trying to do the steps automatically on a new container that it has created. Okay, it has created a new image, as well as it will try to delete the container that it has used for creating. So what it did, it created a new container with this container ID, and inside that it ran the update, and then it installed the vim package. Once it is done, from this it is creating a new image, and then it deletes this container. Okay, so that is how if you run the docker images command, I can now see that we have our new image that we created available. Okay, and in this, if I go ahead and use this, okay, and if I use this image, now inside this we will be getting the vim package by default. Okay, so that is how, rather than we manually creating a container and then for that running the docker run command and going inside it and running all the commands one by one, come out of it and then run a docker build and then docker tag, to do all those things we will be using the docker file, which will be doing everything automatically, where we will be specifying the instructions one by one. Okay, getting it on the logic first so that we will get into deeper on what are the other options or the keywords or instructions that we have in Docker file, wherein the very first line in your Docker file should be the keyword called from, which specifies what is the container that it has to use in the background to automate the process of creating the image. Okay, and any step that you want to run or a command you want to run inside the container, you will be specifying it using run followed by the command. Getting it? Vinay, Satish, hurry? Okay. Now, what are the other instructions that we want to give? So let's look at the instructions and see how we can run the Docker file one by one. Okay. So as we saw, the first default instruction that we have is from, which will specify what is the image that you have to use to create a container out of which we are going to automate the process of creating a image. Then the next one is we saw run. So any command that you want to run inside the container, you will be giving it inside the option called run or the keyword called run. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. Then we have one more option called CMD, where CMD specifies what is that command that you want to run as soon as the container is launched. So when you're trying to run the container, which is being created based on this image, right? So what is that first thing that you want to run? It is not the first command that you're running here, but after creating the image from this, using this image, if you run certain container, in that container, what is the first command that you want to run? So that is what you're going to specify using CMD. So now if I give in the Docker file instructions as CMD and some command, then it is not going to run in this container, but using this container, whatever the image that we have created, from this, if you create another container, in that, the very first command that you're going to run is CMD. Okay, so in fact, you can consider the CMD as the entry point for your container. So while using an image, if you're specifying a particular entry point or a command, then by default, what it will do is, if you have not specified anything, then it will be taking this particular command, whatever you have given. So that is how, if you have an image in which you want some application to be installed and automatically run, so that as soon as you create a new container based on an image, you can set up a CMD in such a way that as soon as you create a container, there will be a default command or a script that you can run, so that as soon as you get a container inside it, that particular script or command will be running. So that is how you can have an installation of an application inside and you can run it directly, so that every time we create a container, this particular command as the CMD will get executed as the first entry point command for the container. Okay. When you're passing the values, you always have to pass the CMD in the square brackets, and inside this, each option that you want to pass as a command will be separated by comma. Okay. So that is how you're going to pass it. So now let's see the same example here. Okay, for a minute, let me remove this. If I don't want to run this, I can simply specify a comment. Okay, so here, what we will do is we will say CMD, and in the CMD, we'll just simply give a command called hi, and we will give this message. So now what will happen when you're trying to create an image from this content, using that image, when you create a new container, while calling a new container, we know that we can pass a entry point in the beginning. So if you do not give it, then it will be taking this as the entry point or the first command inside that container, and it will be running. So let's try to use it. Let me open another screen. Okay, and let me go to the directory. So I'm in the same directory as where we have the Docker file. So in this, I'll say, let's create a new image. Okay, so we'll say Docker build -t my image June 02. Okay, and dot, so that it will be reading this configuration and it will be trying to create a image out of this. So now you can see, since there are only two commands that we have given, first what it has done is it has basically created a new container, and in this it just ran only the cmd, so there's nothing happened, and we have got a new image by the name my image zone. So if you say docker images, you can see you have got a new image. So now from this image, if I create a new container, in that the first command that it will be running is this. Okay, so watch this. So now if I create a new container based on this image, and if I do not give any command, that is the entry command after this, you can see it is basically running that as the first command when you're trying to call a container. Same thing, if I pass anything else, what will happen? It will overwrite with what you have given. So that is how you can see that if you do not give any entry point, that will be taken by default from the CMD. So whatever that you have given, it will be running it as it is. Whereas if you pass an entry command, then it will replace the CMD that you had given inside your Docker file, which is available in this image. Okay, so that's the use for CMD. So that whenever you want to create a container, and in that automatically if you want to run some script or command, then you will be using it. But remember, if you pass a entry point here, then this will overwrite whatever is the content that you have specified inside the image. Getting it? What is CMD? Next, there is another option called entry point. Now, this is exactly same as CMD, but the only difference is in the CMD, as we saw, if you pass any command, then that will be overwriting what you have given in the CMD. Suppose instead of overwriting, if you want to take this and add as one more option to the existing CMD, then you will not be using CMD. At that point of time, we will be using entry point. So what will happen in entry point is, if you have given entry point under command, then while Docker is running the image and it is created, if you do not pass, this will be the default one that it will be running. But if you additionally pass something from the command prompt on the entry point, then instead of overwriting it, it will append to it and then even take that value as a parameter to the option that you have given. So that is how, if you want to overwrite or replace the content, then you just say CMD. But if you want to append to the existing one, then we will say it as the entry point. So here, same thing. If I just change it to entry point, okay. And now from this, let's create a new image. So I'm going to create my image June 3 from this, okay. Oh, sorry. So we are going to build a new image called my image June 03 from this Docker file. So it is automatically creating. And now from this, let us try to use this and create a new container. Okay. So now watch what happens. If I say Docker run -it and this image. And if I do not give any option, then by default it will be running this and it is printing me the output. The same thing now, if I give some option here, so if I pass a entry point here, then instead of replacing it with here, it is going to add it as one more value and execute this. You can see, so the command that I've given is echo, and for the echo, if you add one more option, pretty much it is going to echo both of them, right? So it is like this, echo Adam, and followed by this. Okay, so if you give both of them, then the output what you'll be getting is this. That is the same thing that we are getting it here. Okay, so getting the difference. So if you give it as an entry point, and if you pass an option as an entry point here, it will be adding as a value to what you have specified in the entry point. The same thing, if you want to overwrite the value with the existing value, then you will be giving it as CMD. So simply, CMD means it will take the default value, but if you specify it, it will overwrite. Whereas if you want to append to the existing value rather than overwriting, then you will be using entry point. Getting the difference between entry point and CMD? Okay. Now, moving on. Work DAR. So there is an instruction called as work DAR. So what is the purpose of this work DAR? Now, when you are writing the Docker file, what will happen? All the instructions that you will give will be in this, and the Docker will create a new container and it will try to run everything one by one. But while it is running, is there a specific directory inside which it has to do everything? So that is when, if you specify it using workdir, what Docker will do is, after creating the container, it will go to that specific directory, and under that it will be doing all the steps. Okay, so let's try to see that quickly. Where now, let's say instead of entry point, now I'll do one thing. I'll say run, and I'll create a file called test. Okay, so I'll say test docker. Now see this, where it is getting created. Now this is my Docker file. So quickly let's create a image from this. Okay, I'll call it as 04. Okay, and then from this let's create a new container. So in this, if you look, it has created the file under root by default, because whenever you are going inside the container, by default it is available in the root directory. Hence it is trying to create this file in the directory where it is trying to run from the container. So by default it goes to the container under the root, and that is where it is trying to execute all the steps or commands one by one. So that case here, this file has got created under the root of this container. Now, in some case, if you want to change some directory and then run this command, whatever you have given or the steps, then you can use the workdir. So what workdir instruction will do is, after going to the container, it will go to that specific folder what you have given, and in that it is going to run all the instructions that you have specified. Okay, so that is what we are going to do now. So pretty much now what I'll do is, above this, now what we will do, we will try to give the instruction as workdir and some directory. Okay, so if I say workdir/temp, then what will happen? While the container is created, it will go inside the temp folder and then run this command. So that is how, based on this image, whatever we have, when we try to create a new container, under the temp folder of that container, you can see a new file called test docker. Okay. So let's try to create one more image quickly. So I'll say image 5. And from this image 5, let's create a container. Okay. Now, if you go to the temp folder and then see, there will be a file available. That is because we have changed the working directory inside that container to this specific folder, and inside this, whatever commands that you're going to give following it will be executed. And not only that, if you have watched very carefully, the first directory now where we have gone inside while creating a container is based on this. So it is not only used for trying to specify where this command has to run inside the container, but also when you try to create a new container based on the image of this, then it is going to specifically switch the directory to that particular location what you have specified in the workdir. So that is how it will always go to that directory by default and run all the other options that we want. Okay, so workdir means you specify all the instructions that Jenkins has to run from which particular location. Okay, and based on that, all the other instructions that you give will be run from this particular directory under the workdir. Getting it? Vinay, Satish, Nagesh, Karnakar. Did you get it? What is the purpose of workdir? So if you want, we can still change the value during runtime. That is, now during the runtime, that is creating a container, if you give -w and give a path, then what will happen? So Docker will be changing the directory to this directory location, and from there onwards, it will be allowing you to work. Now here, the same thing, we were going under the temp because we have specified here, right? So if I try to create a new container, and for this container, if you give the option called -w, then let's say -w, and I'll give some other folder. So let's say user, okay, /user. Sorry, this is 5. Okay, so now if you can look, the default directory on which we are working is the /user. So that is how, if you have defined a workdir in the image, it will go to that location. If not, you can pass the same thing using the command line option when you're invoking Docker, and it will be actually going into this directory, and this is the directory from where it is going to basically run all the commands that you want to run. So either you can pass it through workdir or pass the -w option. Okay, so that is workdir. Now suppose when you're creating a new image, and out of that image, if a person creates a container, now if you want to set certain environment variable, then you can use an instruction called env, and you can specify what is the environment variable and what is the value of it that you can store, so that the new container that we are going to create will also have that particular environment variable. Now here I am inside a container. Here let me check if I have an environment variable called my name, for instance. As of now, there is nothing, right? So here in this particular Docker file, if I give the name called env as the instruction, and in this, let's say my name followed by the value that you want to give. Okay. So what will happen now is when you create a container, and from that, when it creates the image, it will try to store the name of the environmental variable as my name, and inside that it will be having a value called Adam. So that is how from this, if I create a new container, inside that, if I go and do the same thing, I'll be getting back the value. So that is how using the keyword called env, we'll be setting up a environment variable in the image that we are going to create. So let me save. Let's come out of the container, and here let's first create a new image. So I'll say 6. So you can see it is trying to run all the commands one by one. So whatever the steps that we have given, it is going to run one by one. Okay. And in that, now if I create a new container from this, okay, so let's say docker run hyphen and the 6th name. Okay. So now if I say this, what is it going to do? Now under this, if you say my name, you can see the environment variable is set inside the container by default. So that is how you can try to set a environment variable using this keyword called env inside your Docker file. Getting it? On how do you specify a environment variable inside your image? Then followed by that, we have a keyword called user. So what is the purpose of user? Now, what exactly happens when you create a container? So here, if you see, I'm sorry, not this. Here. So I am inside this container, right? And in this, if you see, I'm working as root. So what happens exactly when you create a container is, it's not just going to create the container, but as which user that you are trying to run, it will be allowing the same user inside the container. Okay, so that means if you're trying to execute the Docker run as a particular user, then the container will be created and it will be allowing you to run inside using the same account as whom you have executed the Docker run. So if you have executed as root, then the container will get created as the root account, and inside that you will be working as the root only. Okay, so that is how, as whatever user that you are trying to run, it will be creating the container with the same person, and inside that it will be running it. Suppose you do not want to run everything inside the container as the same user, then you can use the option called as user. Okay, where if I try to say the user, all the instructions that it is going to run inside the specific container will be run as that particular account. And not only that, when you create a container from that image, the account that you have specified here using the user is what you will be seeing it internally as the user as whom you are running everything. Okay, so to cross check now, first thing what I'll do is, you can see we created a file called test docker, and what is the permission of that, or the owner? The owner is root. That is because we are running everything inside this container as root. That is why it is available as root. Now here, before this, I will say user, and I'm going to just give a dummy account called nobody. Okay, so now what happens in this is, when you try to execute this Docker file, on the new container that it is going to create, what it will do, first it will go to this particular directory inside this container, and in that it will be switching the user as nobody, and then it will run all these commands whatever you have given one by one. And from this, if you create a new image, out of this, if I create a new container once again, what will happen? Now, inside that, the default person as whom you will be going in is the user that you have specified. As well as if you go and check this file, we will be having the permission of this file as the nobody. Okay, so let's quickly try that. So first, let's build an image out of this changes. So I'll call it as image 7. And you can see it is running all the step one by one. And now from this image 7, we will create a new container. Okay. And you can see under the temp, the file that we have created is created as the user called nobody, because when we were running the instructions, it has used the account called nobody and it has run everything. So that is how you can specify what is the account that you want to use to run. And not only that, in this, if you look at the name of the user, it is nobody. Okay, so this is how you can specify it inside a Docker file, and whenever you create a container based on its image, you will be working as that particular user inside this. Suppose if I want to change this, let's say every time when I create a container out of this image, it is always going to allow me as nobody. Suppose if I want to change it to some other user, once again, here you can simply say -u and the name of the user as whom you want to connect or run everything inside it. So now you can see I am inside the container which is created based on this image, but here I have explicitly said to use the account called root. So that is how it is replacing with the default user that you have specified, and because of which you are trying to work everything or create everything as root. Okay, so this is how, if you want to be available inside an image in terms of the user ID, then you will say it using user. The same thing while creating a container manually, if you want to change the user, then you can say -u and the container will be created using this user account. Getting it? That is how you specify what user that we have to take up using the, during the runtime. Getting it? Okay. And going back to the concept of volume that we saw in the last class. What is a volume? Can anyone recall what is a volume? Yeah, a volume is nothing but a special directory through which you can share some contents between a container. Now, when we had to manually create a volume inside a container, then we were using the -v option, correct? The same thing now, if I want to first create a volume inside this container, and from this I have to create an image. So if I want to do, then that instruction that we have to give in the Docker file will be using a keyword called volume. So what this will do is, now while it is creating this temporary container, okay, so what is the Docker will do? It will try to create a new volume under this with the name of the folder that you are having. Then from this, it is going to create an image. So that is how now whenever we create a new container based on this image, it will be having this volume by default inside that also. So that is how you can make sure that a particular volume is just going to pre-exist inside a image, and from that if you create a container it will be available. Okay, it's the same thing as we were invoking it through the command line using -v. So instead we can specify it as a volume in this. Okay, so now let's try to change it here. So if I say volume, and let's give some data or the directory inside which you want to act it as a special directory called volume, so that you can specify it using the square brackets. Okay, so now let's say I'm going to create a folder called data, and that will be used as a volume inside that image. So from that image, whatever containers that we are going to create, that will be having the particular volume by default as /data, just to make sure we do not have a data in all the other containers, right? So let's exit. The first thing we will do is we will try to build this into a new image. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, out of this changes, I'm going to build a new image. Okay, so we will build a new image where it is going to run all the steps one by one. Okay, and out of this, if you run the Docker images, you can see we have created a new image called my image June 08. Correct? Now, from this, if I create a container, that container will have certain volume called a /data, that if I want, I can share it to another container. So let's try that. So we will use this and create a new container. Okay. Now, what I'm doing, I'm trying to use this image, and in this image, I'm going to go inside as a root, and then we will be trying to create a new container. Okay. So under this, if you now go to data, there is a folder available because this is a volume that we have created from this image. So let me put some file here. Okay, and let us keep this as it is. Now from this, what we will do, probably I'll create one more. Okay, now what we will do is we will try to create a new container, and for that container we will try to specify this location, or we will say use the volumes from this. Okay, so now I'll simply say docker run -it. Let's say I will use the base Ubuntu image, and for this, now if I have to use the /data from this particular container, then what is that we have to do? We will say privilege this one, privileged equal to true, and then volumes from the name of the container. Correct? So privileged equal to true, and is the spelling correct? LEGD. Okay. Privileged equal to true, and then we will say volumes from, and for this we are going to specify the value that the container that we have created some time back. Okay, so this I will specify the container here. So now out of this, it has created a new container. So if you go, you can see that the data folder is also available, and in that you also have this particular file. And if you delete it directly, it is also going to be get deleted inside that. So that is how you can create a volume using the Docker file using the special keyword called volume. Getting it? Any questions? Is that clear so far? Okay, now we have certain more options that we will see. So the first thing is copy instruction. Now here, when we are creating a temporary container for creating an image, whatever instructions you want, we will be giving in the Docker file. But let's say if I want to create a volume inside it, I am going to create a instruction called volume, and that will be creating inside it. But what if I want to share something from the host machine to the container, so that using this it has to package or it has to create this image? So what I'm trying to say is, while creating this container, I want to put some files which is available in our host machine, so that from this container, when it creates the image, that file will be available in the image. So for that, first we have to put that file inside the container, right? So how is that you're going to do? Because we are not doing any connection between this container, because if you are connecting, then we can copy. So for that kind of instructions, we will be using a keyword or a special instruction called copy, where if you give a specific file name which is available on your host machine, that will get copied to the specific folder inside your container, so that inside this container, whatever the file that you are specifying, it will get copied. So to copy the file from your host machine to this temporary container which the Docker is using for creating the image is what we call it as copy. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is, let's come out of this, and okay, here to this particular one. So let's say what we will do now is, here I'll say copy, and from the current directory we will try to copy a dummy file. Okay, and that we will try to put it under the data folder, and if you want, you can give a name also for what you want to put it as. Okay, so what I'm doing now is, when you execute this Docker file in the current directory, if there is a file called dummy file, it will try to take that and it will try to put inside this folder or the volume what you have created. Okay, so that is what we are going to do. So let's save this. Okay, all right, now we have only the Docker file in this current directory, correct? So here I will create the same file. Okay, so I have two files in it, and from this location, if I do docker build -t, and let's give the name. Now what it is going to do, while it is creating the temporary container, it will try to create a volume, and inside this, from our host machine, this file will get copied inside this particular folder inside this container. So that from this temporary container, if you create a new image, that will also be available. So that is how, if a person is going to create a container from this image, he will be getting the file which you have copied inside it from our host. Okay, so you can see it is copying everything. Okay, it has just copied. Now from this, if I create a new container, so I'm using the newly created image and I'm trying to create a new container out of it. So now if you go to the data folder, it will be available because we have created it, and in that you can see you have the same file available. Whereas remember, it is not sharing, but it has just copied, because now if I try to edit this file, for example, here, let me edit this. Okay. If I change some content into it, let's say test line, and I'll put inside this file. Okay. And if you come out of this and see in the host, it will not be modifying it. Okay. So I'm back to my host. You can see there is nothing because it has not been sharing, but what we are doing using the copy instruction is we are copying our file or a file from our host machine to the particular container, so that this file will be put inside our image, and from that, if a person is creating a container, we will be getting that file inside his container automatically. Getting it? What do you mean by copy? Okay. The same way, now, what if we have more than one files to copy? Now, if it is one file, then simply I can give copy command. Suppose if I have more than one files, then I cannot keep writing the Docker file for each file. I cannot say copy this file, copy this file. I cannot give 10 or 15 lines based on how many files we have. So in that case, we can make use of another instruction called add, where what is that add going to do? Now it is exactly similar as copy, but the difference is now if you have a file which is specifically of a archive means a tar file or a zip file, then instead of copying it like how the copy instruction does, what add will do is add will extract the content what you have inside your container. Okay, so if you keep a particular star file on your host machine, and if you say add, it will direct and it will go inside the temporary container and it will extract everything to a specified directory. Okay, so that is what it is going to do rather than copying. So this is how, if you have more than one file, then simply you can try to put everything as a archive, as a simple zip file or as a tar file. Then if you say add, what it will do, while creating the temporary container, it will extract the content of this archive into the specific folder what you have given. Okay, now let's do that simply. Here we have two files, right? So we will create a tar file out of these two files. So I'll say create a tar file where I will say add.tar and both the files. Okay, you can see now we have created a file called add.tar, and inside this it is going to contain these two files. You can see inside this tar we have two files. Okay, so now instead of copying it one by one, we can use the instruction here. So if I say add and the name of the file and where you want to extract it. So now it will not copy this but extract the content of this inside this folder called data on the temporary container, and the same thing will be taken forwarded as creating a image. Okay, so I've just added it. So from this, let's create a new image. Okay, so it would have extracted, and from this, let us create a new container. This is the image that we created now. So here, if you go to data, you can see it has directly extracted these two files which is available inside this archive or the tar file. So that is how, if you have more than one files to copy, simply create an archive and put it using add, where rather than copying, it will directly extract it to the specified folder. Getting it? Any questions? Okay. Now, when you're actually writing a Docker file, we will be giving an instruction called maintainer. Actually, it is not used for executing anything, but just to know who is the person who is going to take care of this Docker file and maintaining it. Okay, so it is just like a comment. Docker will not execute anything what you have given. So when you are trying to write a Docker file, it's like a header message, or it is the information to know who is been maintaining it and who is writing. So you can give this instruction called maintainer, and to this, if you give the username and the email ID, it will be storing it, so that at any point of time, if you want to know who is the person who created it, it is like a comment where we can specify the username and the email ID of the person who has been creating and modifying this particular Docker file. So only for that purpose you will be telling the maintainer instruction, which will tell who exactly is writing or maintaining this Docker file. Okay, so it's just a way for maintaining it. And then coming to the other one, expose. So if you recall, yesterday we were seeing, if we have some web application inside our particular Docker container, and if you want to expose that to the particular host machine, then you will be using -p. The same thing is what you're going to do here. So now let's say if you are using this container, temporary container, to actually install some application, rather than just installing a VIM, let's say you are using it to install a application. Then when you create an image, from this image, this application will be running inside it, correct? So that now from this image, if we create a new container, this application will also be running in the new container. Now, if I want to access whatever is available inside it, then I should have exposed the port specifically in that new container. So that is what you're going to do it here using the instruction called expose. So what it will happen is, when you say expose and the port number, while creating the temporary container, it will expose the port whatever that you're specifying here on this particular container, so that the same thing will be getting created as an image. And from this image, if we create a new container, what will happen? In that container, the application will also be running, as well as the port 8080 whatever that you have in that will also get exposed. So that is how you can think about using a Docker image, where you can install certain application and you can run it, as well as if you create a new image, and from that, if a person creates his container, he will be getting the application running inside it, as well as he will be able to access that application outside the container, so that you will be exposing the port number specific to that application what you're trying to install. Getting it? What do you mean by expose? It is the same thing how we manually created a container, we will pass the option -p. The same thing, if you are going to use the Docker file for this temporary container, then we will be giving it through this instruction called expose, so that when it is creating this container, in this it will be exposing a port called 8080 or whatever that you have specified. Now, anything that is available in the container will be exactly taken and created as an image. And from this image, if we create any new container, we will be getting the exact content what you have in the image on that container. So that particular application as well as whatever the port which you have exposed will also be the same thing on the new container. Getting it? Getting what is exposed? Okay. Now with this, yes, wherever you are running, it is the same port. That is what you are giving it. Because if it is exposing something else, and what is the purpose? Whatever the port number you give, that is the same port number which it will be exposing it on the host also. Now, with this example, whatever that we have, I mean, the different kind of instructions, let's quickly see certain examples on how is that you're going to write a Docker file and use it for some purpose. Now, let's say we want to create a Docker file so that in that Docker file, we want to set up Apache. Okay, this is the requirement in your company saying that now you want to set up Apache on a machine. Now, rather than creating a new machine and in that machine you have to run all the steps manually, what we can do is we can quickly use the Docker file in which whatever the commands that you wanted to run manually, you can pass it up, and using that, if you create an image, anyone who is going to use this image and create a container, he will be getting a container in which Apache will be running as a installation or a local installation for him. Okay, so this is one example. Now, for this, let's see how a particular Docker file is written. So this is a Docker file where now, what does the first line say? So this line says that we are going to create a temporary container for doing all the steps, right? For creating an image, we need to have a specific container, and for that container, what is the base image that you're going to use? So that is what we are giving it here, so that it is equivalent to saying docker run -it this. Okay, so while the Docker is trying to read this, it will create a temporary container based on this base image. Okay, and then you are going to set what is the maintainer's name here just as a reference, and then this is the command which I want to manually run inside it. Okay, so if I say run followed by any command, this is the command that you're going to run inside that temporary container. So rather than writing multiple commands, I have joined everything as one command. So the difference here is this is actually everything is a separate command. So instead of saying run apt get update and then on the next line once again saying run apt get install Apache 2, and then on one more run we will say apt get clean, and then on the fourth line run rm this. So instead of giving 4 runs, what I've given is in the same run command I'm trying to add all the commands. So this ampersand is the operating system command, to be clear. Now let's say you want to run some command here, okay, as an operating system. Now what I can do is, now currently I am in this location, okay, under root. So if I want, I can do cd temp, this is one command, and in this I can run a ls command, correct? So these are 2 commands. Suppose if I want to combine both of them and run in one stretch, then you can do this way. So let me go back to root. Okay. The same thing I can say is cd temp and ls. So, okay. So I'm just joining two commands to run it together. And you can see now we are inside the temp and the same time it has executed the ls also. So that is how you can combine two commands. So what I have used this here is rather than giving 4 run instructions separately, I have just given it as one command and I have joined all this command together. So what it is going to do, it is going to update the apt-get by making sure all the libraries is up to date, and then it is going to install Apache 2 package for Ubuntu, and then it is going to clean all the unnecessary packages, and if there is any files present at this location, it is just going to delete. So I'm just trying to make sure we do not have any existing files. Okay, then for the Apache, if I want to set an environment variable, then I'm going to use an environment variable env instruction, and in this I am saying the user for creating the or running this particular Apache, the name is www-data. It's just a dummy name. Same way, what is the group associated to this so that that should be used to run the Apache? I'm setting it as one more environment variable called run group. And then if I want to set a log directory, then I'm setting up one more environment variable and I'm giving some location. And then finally, I'm saying expose the port 80 so that by default Apache will be running on a port 80. Okay, so this is the one. Now look at what is the CMD. So what is CMD? CMD is the first command that will get invoked whenever you are calling a container. So when you're calling a container, internally, I am giving this Apache command to invoke. So what will happen as soon as we create a container, it is going to call this command by default, where this is the command which is going to start the Apache inside this container. So that is how as soon as we create this image, from this image, if I create a command, and I'm sorry, create an image, and from that image, if I create a new container, and for that container, if I do not give an entry point, then it will take this and automatically run. So that is how as soon as I create a container, in that container, we will be having Apache pre-installed, as well as Apache will also be get started automatically so that we don't have to go inside and run. So that is how, if needed, we can run it as a demonized command where I don't want to go inside the container. So if I just call this image and using this, if I create a new container in the background, automatically once the container is created, you will be having all this, and along with it, it will also be starting the Apache directly so that I don't have to go inside and start it. You can directly start it. Getting it? So this is one example. So now let's try to run this. So now let me copy this and let me go back to the same directory. I'm sorry, here. Let's come out again, clearly see. So now in this folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, okay, where we have created a Docker file for Apache, right? So I'll call it as Docker file Apache. I'm just creating a new name for it, nothing else. Now, what is that we have done? We have created a new file called Dockerfile Apache, and inside that we have specified a instruction to create a image wherein you should install Apache. But we know that now we have to build an image out of this. Then when you are running the Docker build command, you need to specify the name of the file, because by default, what is that we were doing so far? We were just saying the dot here, if you remember. Where is that? Yeah. So we used to give a dot here, right? So what does this represent? This represent that in my current directory, you pick up the Docker file or the name with this standard file. But now I have created a file with a different name. So that is when you're trying to run that particular file, then you have to pass an additional option called as -f, and you will give the name of the file. Okay, so that is what additionally you have to tell. So now if I want to create my new image, then maybe here I can say -t, whatever the name of the image. So let's say I'll say the name of the image is my Apache image. And in this, you'll say -f, and where is the file located? So the file that you will have to specify using the -f and the name of the file. Okay, and then it is available in the current directory. So now this is the only difference. So if you run this, it is going to now create a new image called Apache image based on the instructions what you have given. And using that image, if you try to create a new container, it will automatically have the Apache installed inside it, as well as we will be able to run the Apache inside it automatically. You can see it's executing all the steps one by one. Okay, now you can see we have created a new image called Apache image. So if I have to create a container from this, then what is that we have to do? Specifically, now I'll be using this command. So let's try to understand this command first. So here, Docker run means I'm creating a new container. And in that, I'm saying -d, which means I'm not interested to attach to that container. I just want to run it in a background. And for that, I am saying port 8080, so that whatever the port 80 which we have exposed inside that is going to be accessed by the port 80 from our host machine. Okay, and then in that, if I want to access, because now inside the container what we are going to create, it is going to contain Apache installed. Suppose if I want to access something from it, how can I access from the host machine? So I'm trying to share the directory called where www.html on my host machine to the same directory, because this is the location by default Apache will be installing all the files. So when you try to connect to Apache, it will be trying to use all the files default available in this location. So that is how now I don't even have to go inside the container. From my host machine, if I change a new HTML file or whatever I put inside it, the same thing will be picked up by the Apache running inside it. And then finally, we are giving the name of the image. And in this, I am not giving any command to run. So what will happen? By default, it will take this command to run. And what is this command? You are calling the Apache which you have installed inside the container. So that is how Apache will be started by default, and it will be running in the background. Okay. So if you want to check, if you say Docker PS, you can see that it is trying to run this here. Correct. And in this now, if I want to access this, so if I just go to this particular machine :80, you can see you are trying to access the Apache in it. I think it is still trying to use the previous one. Okay, it is not accessing because we, for the example in the last class, I installed the Nginx, right? So it is trying to use the same thing here. But if not, there you go. Here, we are actually now connecting to the Apache, which we have installed in our container that is running here. You can see this. So this is how you can write your own Docker file where you will give whatever the instructions that you want. Now, this image, if I can give it to anyone, they can try to create their own container in which they will be having the image by default, the Apache by default inside it. Getting it? Is that clear? Now, herein is there is another example where suppose, let's say I want to set up a database called MongoDB. Okay, then once again for that MongoDB, whatever the instructions that you want to give, you will try to create a Docker file. So now if you look at this, I have written the Docker file in a neat way. So instead of putting up everything, you can put some comments using the hash so that easily you can understand. So now this Docker file, you can see this line specifies the base image that you want to use, and then what is the author for the person to maintain it. And then first thing what you have to do is you need to update your operating system's repository by saying apt-get. So for that, you will be giving the instructions called run apt-get update. And after that, you need to specify from where you want to download everything. So that is what you're going to specify here, that this is the repository from which we are going to download the MongoDB. And then once again, after this, you're going to install MongoDB specifically by running this command. And after that, for storing everything, you need to create a separate database directory so that you will be creating it using this. And finally, the MongoDB will be specifically available on a port called 27017, and that is what we are trying to expose. And after that, if you are trying to call that container which has been created from this image, you want the MongoDB to be running by default. So this is the command that we will be giving in the CMD, so that while creating the container, if you do not give any command, it will be trying to take this and run as the default one, so that the container will have the MongoDB installed and it will be running inside it. Okay, so this is how you can create your own particular images where you will use the Docker file to specify all the instructions. Okay, now let's try to run this also and see. Now you might get some error, but let's not worry on that. So what I'll do now, I'll create another file. I'll call Docker file MongoDB. Okay, and inside this we will try to put the same instruction. And after this, now we have to once again create an image out of it, so that I can use docker build-t. The name of the image I will give it, and what is the name of the file that you want to use for that. So I can here. So what it is going to do, basically, it is going to run all the instructions that you have given in this Docker file, and it is going to create an image called MongoDB img. And in this, if you're trying to use a new container to create from it, automatically MongoDB will be installed and it will be running inside it. Okay, so this is how you're going to get a specific instance of MongoDB. So like this, all different kind of images that you want to create, you can create it by yourself. All you have to do is you will give all the instructions using the Docker file, wherein whenever you want to recreate it, it is easy, because rather than we doing all the commands one by one, you can see we can just simply create an image by automating that. And with some small changes, whenever you want to recreate the same image, it's always easy, right? Just go to the particular file and modify whatever changes you want and rerun the Docker file. Then it will try to create the new image with all the updated changes. So that is how we can actually think about reusing the Docker file and create our own image. Okay. Now, it's not only that. So one of the advantage, as we are seeing here, is we can create our own image using the Docker file. But if you look in the Docker's open source community or the community edition, we will be having many images which is available for us to directly use. So that is how many tools that we want is already pre-installed into some image, where someone else in the open source community would have already created an image in the same way like how we have created using Docker file. They would also have created an image using Docker file, and using that they would have automated a step for creating some application, so that we have now all the Docker images available, which will be having a specific image inside which you will be having specific application running. So now, for example, if you want Jenkins, all you have to do is search for Jenkins. So you can see now the Docker open source community has so many images already available, which can give you the installation of Jenkins. So that now if you use any one of this, and if you try to create a container, you will be getting the Jenkins pre-installed in it, so that now you don't have to worry about installing Jenkins at all. Same way, the other example, Artifactory. Now, if I have to install Artifactory, now I have to do all the steps like what we did for MongoDB. Instead of that, what we can do, there is already a image available for that. You can search. If it is available, you can directly go ahead and use that particular image, so that all you have to do is just create a container. That's it. When you're creating a container, you specify that image, and in that image, whatever the application is installed, you will also be getting the same thing inside your container. So that is how, without spending much of the time, you can make use of all the images which is available in the Docker open source community, which can help us to save the time and save time in configuring also. So that is how, by just creating a container, you're not just creating a separate virtualization through OS, but also you're going to get all the application which is put inside it, and also you're going to start using it directly. So that is how Docker can be used in many ways for replicating environment. We can use it as a OS level virtualization. We can also use it to create our own image and share it with others within the company. Okay, so that's the major advantage. Now, let's quickly see on how is that you are going to create a Jenkins server. Now, instead of installing Jenkins, you can use this to create. So now the command here, what it is doing is, now I am saying to create a container, and for that container I am exposing the port called 8080, and in that I'm just giving the name for this container called as Jenkins master. Okay, and in that I am trying to create this container in a daemonized mode. And directly, if you want to set an environment variable from the command line, I can use the same option. This is like creating an environment variable using Docker file. The same thing is what I am doing. And finally, what is this? This is the name of the particular image which I'm going to use. So that now, using this image, I am trying to create a container with this name. So you can look at Docker PS. You can see now there is a container running which is based on this image, and inside this you have Jenkins running. Okay, so if you want to look at that also, you can say docker top and give that. You can see it is actually running some shell script inside which it is using a Jenkins var, and that is what we can access it using the port 8080. So now for this machine, if I go and say port number 8080, we will be actually connecting to the Jenkins. So you can see I'm actually trying to connect to the Jenkins, which is available in this particular machine that we have running it. Okay, so it is so simple now. We don't even have to install anything. Getting it? What is the advantage of Docker here? Now, same example. If you want to install Artifactory, we can even do this. Okay, so if you just go up, I have an example somewhere copied. Okay, now so to debug this, if you can see now, I am creating a container with the name. So when I say name, and if I say -d, it is going to be creating the container in the demonized mode so that I don't want to go inside it. And for that, I'm creating a volume where I'm sharing the host machine with the directory with the same directory so that I can access the logs which has been put inside the container under this folder by default by installing Artifactory. I can access it from the machine. And then Artifactory runs by default on a port called 8080 that we are going to access it. And then this is the name of the image which we are trying to use, where inside this we have the Artifactory server pre-installed. So when we just create this container, it is going to run the Artifactory server which is installed inside this automatically, and that we will be exposing the port called 8081 through which we are going to access it. Okay, so if you want to access it, simply if you run this, okay, so okay, there's already a container available. So I'll just change the name to 501. Why this was available? Because when I created the first time for showing you the continuous delivery, I created that container. That's why it is showing you. Now you can see I have a new container running in which I have another installation of Artifactory running. So from the same machine here, if I give 8081/artifactory, now you will be accessing the Artifactory which is installed on that particular container that we just created. So that is how you can see by creating different containers, you can specify an image so that by default you will be having all the installation into it, so that we don't have to now spend time in doing all the installation and configuring. We can create a simple container by using a image which is available in the Docker, which will be having all the specific tool whatever we want. So like this, almost now any tool that you want, it will already be pre-installed and there will be an image available in the Docker. So all you have to do is create a container from that, and you'll be having the same copy of that particular application running inside your container. So that's how you can access it. Getting it? It'll take some time to load. Is that clear?
Now, are you guys getting what is the advantage of Docker, where you can use it for acting as a OS level virtualization, and then how you can use it for replicating the environment, and if needed we can create our own image, or we can save the time in installing and configuring application. Rather than we doing it everything, we can use an image which has everything pre-built, that we can use it directly and create our own container. There you go, you got it. Getting it?